Please be seated. We're absolutely thrilled here at the NATO Association of Canada to have Minister Kenney, Tim Hewish, and our chair, the Honorable Hugh Segal, to speak to us this afternoon on such an interesting topic, a novel idea, and one that merits quite a bit of discussion. We're absolutely thrilled to have our three speakers here. I'd also like to note that we've got two of our very generous sponsors, General Dynamics Canada, represented at the moment by Commodore Kelly Williams here, right in the flesh at the table. We've also got Mark McQueen from Ports Toronto, who has been a huge supporter of the NATO Association of Canada. And I'd like to thank him with a round of applause. So first of all, just give me one moment so I can get my notes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the NATO Association of Canada. I'm sure most of you know a bit about the Atlantic Council of Canada, our former name. We changed it just recently. It's the organization goes back till 1966, and we just felt that the NATO Association of Canada better represents what we stand for. We stand for peace and security, prosperity. We want to tell Canadians, we educate them about the importance of security. Most Canadians go through their entire lives without really having to worry about security issues. Not on the street anyway, not on the way to work. We read about it elsewhere. Once in a while we see terror in our own capital, but most of the time we're able to go about our lives in perfect peace and contentment. That's great, and that's amazing, but we need to be constantly thinking about how lucky we are and how to maintain this security, how to keep what we have. And that only happens if we fight, if we are cognizant of how lucky we are, and if we consider what needs to be done in the future to maintain this. That's what the NATO Association of Canada is trying to do, trying to get stories of what's going on internationally out into the public. We have 42 interns every year who help make this happen. We put on about 25 events annually and publish 1,000 articles. So we're really making a big difference, and I appreciate all of you supporting us in that endeavor. Ellis, can I just...
Thank you. I do want to thank you on behalf of the NATO Association of Canada for attending here today, and we very much look forward to our speakers and the subject, the Commonwealth's call to duty, advancing the modern Commonwealth defense opportunities, a unique opportunity, unique moment, and unique time in history for us.
I'll go straight into it. We're going to hear from Tim Hewish for a brief 10-minute speech to talk a little bit about the Commonwealth's Call to Duty, the publication which he was the author of. He's executive director and co-founder of the Commonwealth Exchange. We were kind enough to hear him 2 years ago talking about how he used the Commonwealth for greater trade. And it's a very important idea. He's now turned his attention to defense. He's a master's in Imperial and Commonwealth History from King's College London, strong knowledge of the Commonwealth, as author of a number of reports on trade, education, and defense. He's also a published Institute of Economic Affairs author, as well as having 7 years of political experience in the UK, Parliament, and Westminster. Tim, can I have you come up to the podium?
Thank you, Robert. Good afternoon, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, may I thank the NATO Association of Canada, particularly Robert and Julie, for their hospitality today, but also their support and encouragement to me and my think tank, Commonwealth Exchange. They kindly invited me back across the pond, so I must have said something positive the first time around, so thank you very much. So I'm here specifically to introduce the underexplored topic of Commonwealth defence and to talk a little bit about our report, which you should all have a copy of here, the Commonwealth's Call to Duty, whose foreword was written by the UK Defence Secretary, Dr. Liam Fox, MP. We produced the report because for us, the answer was actually all apparent. When I gave the launch speech in the UK back in March, we gave a list of regional examples. You see the increasing terrorist atrocities that continue in Nigeria, Kenya, Cameroon, as well as those which endure, sadly, in India and Pakistan, piracy, both in East and West Africa, drug smuggling in the Caribbean, and the frequent natural disasters in the Asia Pacific, and also the Ebola crisis, to see that much needs to be addressed. But importantly, there's a significant number of these issues actually affect Commonwealth countries when you think about it, and it's not just in isolation. And also, 1 week after I gave the speech in March, we saw the devastating images of the cyclone Vanuatu, which killed a number of people. And also, the week after that, we were shaken to the core with the Garissa University attack in Kenya, which killed 147 innocent young people by the Islamist terror group Al-Shabaab. So clearly, Commonwealth countries continue to be affected. Yet, despite the stark difficulties that we see, I also actually see some glimmers of opportunities in the defence sphere through greater Commonwealth interaction and understanding. But also importantly, we at Commonwealth Exchange see the world somewhat differently. Most people operate with a regional bloc mentality, whether that's in Europe, Asia, Africa, or wherever. But I'm afraid that the world is too interconnected for that. We prefer to see the world as a network, and that the Commonwealth itself is the prime network and can provide unique insight into the world's problems. But we also want to build on strong Commonwealth partnerships that endure, such as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK, that develop closer links with emerging, developing Commonwealth countries as well. So therefore, a multi-regional and a cross-regional approach is fundamental, and that's the crux of our position and of the report as well. We acknowledge that the Commonwealth as a concept in terms of defence is starting from a low base, and that's why our recommendations always reflect this, and more of these a bit later on. And importantly, we're not advocating for the creation of a Commonwealth Defence Force or a council to rival NATO. I mean, I am at a NATO lunch after all. But for me, seriously, the Commonwealth is a concept about ensuring peace, prosperity and stability for all of its members. But these do not operate in a vacuum, and we have to be wary of this. And as I said, numerous conflict zones continue to span a number of Commonwealth countries, and as I said, are in fact increasing. So therefore, it makes sense to find geopolitical space to find a pan-Commonwealth solution. But you might rightly ask, why does this actually matter to Canada? For us, when we wrote the report, it was key to say that this wasn't just a UK exercise, and the Commonwealth isn't just a UK institution, it's everyone's. So we want to take a closer look at Commonwealth defence ties and say that it was helpful for every member. And I was fortunate enough to actually write a blog through the Australian think tank, the ASPI, and to discuss why this matters in Australia and New Zealand. So hopefully I'm going to do the same for Canada this lunchtime. So in the report itself, we actually went back to highlight historical links, and we did so with a number of Commonwealth countries, and one of them was Canada. Canada didn't take part in the Commonwealth occupying force in Japan in '45, but did play a role in Korea. And I know that in your own war memorial in Ottawa, you actually commemorate World War I and II and Korea, which is very important, and Britain doesn't do enough of that. Canada chose not to be part of the two other remaining Commonwealth deployments in Malaysia in '54 and Zimbabwe Rhodesia in '79. However, Canada, as we well know, played a role in Afghanistan, but not so in Iraq. But these went under a Commonwealth umbrella, but it does show that Canada does actually act outside its regional domain. That's an important point to take away this lunchtime. We also looked at Canada's current kind of Commonwealth military relationships, and we accept they do orbit a more Anglosphere interaction, maybe the Five Eyes and the ABCA ABCA Armies Programme, to name two. However, the whole point of the report is to say that there should be stronger relationships between developed and emerging Commonwealth countries, and we need to build on these ties. Furthermore, as we know, Canada does have an active presence in the Caribbean, which is home to a large number of Commonwealth countries. I know the training equipment that Canada provided to the Jamaican Defence Force, helping to fund their Caribbean Command and Staff College, as well as many humanitarian disaster reliefs during bad hurricane seasons. I commend Canada on continuing to do that. But of particular interest to me was actually something called the Operational Support Hub that was opened in Kingston, Jamaica. And my research led me to find that Canada intended to open 7 of these operational hubs throughout the world. Some were in Commonwealth, Kenya, Singapore, and Tanzania, as well as Germany, Kuwait, Senegal, and South Korea. And this was 2012, so I very much welcome a comment from the Minister and others to see what the current policy was on these hubs and to see whether progress has been made. We also looked that there was an effort in Canada and Australia to work closer together in the military field. We're well aware of Australia's Asian century and its pivoting towards that area. But I did find a report, a joint think tank report by Australia and Canada, and one of the recommendations suggested that Canada join the five-power defence arrangement, and that's between Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Malaysia, and Singapore. So very much an interesting proposition, and I'd like to see what the two countries could make of that together. Also, that's interesting is that Canada is whether she sees herself as a Pacific power. Obviously, Australia is there, and America has made that pivot. But I think Canada traditionally sees itself more as an Atlantic power. I'm just like to hear comments from the room to see where it sees itself in the next 10 or 15 years, especially within a Commonwealth context. Moving away from nations to issues, I just wanted to highlight 7 areas that the Commonwealth can develop upon, and that's what we wrote in our report. And this ranges from defence diplomacy, interoperability, intelligence sharing, anti-terrorism, humanitarian disaster relief, anti-piracy, and military training. I listed 7, but the list isn't meant to be exhaustive. As you can see, we're not proposing a huge defence architecture, and it'd be extremely unhelpful and actually unwise to do so. It's about forging and enhancing these ties between Commonwealth militaries and their governments. And this leads me on to the report's recommendations, which I think would be most interested in. I'll set the scene briefly, because I understand Mr. Segal would like to make some more detailed comments on these. But as you've no doubt seen through looking through the report and the 2-pager on your desks, our major proposal is for the creation of a Commonwealth Security Forum. And the Commonwealth has many established fora, whether that's in business, in politics, with women, and with youth engagement. The biennial Commonwealth Conference, which is strangely named CHOGM. But one major area, the security field, is actually lacking, and it hasn't really existed at all. And we think that creating one can enhance Commonwealth understanding and advance ties in this current undeveloped area. And as I said, we can discuss the topics I mentioned a short while ago. However, just because there isn't a forum doesn't mean that one should just simply exist. The case must be made, but it also must be compelling. That's why we set up 12 reasons on why the forum could develop strategic relations. And you can read them on the executive summary that you've got on your tables. But I encourage the audience over lunch to think and discuss how this might work in specifically a Canadian context, maybe with its operational hubs, and also just developing ties with its partners in the Asia Pacific and Commonwealth partners in Africa as well. So what would the Commonwealth Forum actually look like? The best method is to look at tried and tested ones that have a track record of success. And that led us to look at the International Institute of Strategic Studies Dialogue Series. The first was called Shangri-La, took place in Commonwealth, Singapore, and was originally just for the Asia Pacific. And in terms of its notoriety, I know that Canada's Chief of Defence Staff actually spoke in May at the conference in Singapore. So it does show that Canada does have a role to play there, and it might well do in a Commonwealth Forum. These dialogues also developed into the Middle East, and most recently Latin America, but they always remain regional or bi-regional. But going back to its Commonwealth with multi-regional purposes, we argue that there could be a pan-Commonwealth Forum that could mirror the IISS template. We've said that the Security Forum is best to take place during the Commonwealth Conference called CHOGM. And as for costs, the sources that run the dialogue series have said it's projected to be a low 7-figure US dollar sum, but it ranges depending on the host nation. And we suggest funding in a combination between defence industry funds, as well as those from the Commonwealth Secretariat or leading Commonwealth partners. But if Commonwealth governments could work together to establish such a forum, then I do sincerely believe that it would be a breakthrough for Commonwealth strategic relations. Moving away from the forum to discuss a creation of a Commonwealth Military Scholarship. This will allow young officers the chance to study in Commonwealth nations. And overall, the rationale for doing so is that it would deepen ties and interactions between Commonwealth personnel early on in their career, and that's fundamental. And these can be carried forward as the officers progress to higher ranks of their respective armed forces. But also develop stronger bonds and also levels of trust between Commonwealth officers and feeds back into future interoperability. And how a wider Commonwealth Military Scholarship actually might take place could be carried forward at a security forum that I've just proposed. Our research specifically looked at a number of Commonwealth colleges that might provide such a scheme. We looked at a UK example, but I don't see why it can be applied to, say, the Royal Military College of Canada, providing a similar option. Its website we looked at a few days ago stated it does accept international students on a case-by-case basis. So if some sort of scholarship could be provided for Commonwealth Forces personnel, then I'd welcome that greatly. Moving on to our final recommendation, is very much upscaling officer exchange programs between Commonwealth Armed Forces. One current example is exercise Long Look, and that takes place between Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, and usually lasts for around 4 months. I'm not acutely aware of the Canadian forces interactions, but I'd like to comment from the room past the minister as well. I know there is certain officer exchanges between Canada and the US, but in terms of a Commonwealth context, that would be very helpful. But we argue that these exercises could be enhanced and also new programs created, not just between the developed Commonwealth countries. And I feel this could help all powers, perhaps for Canada for utilising its soft power, and also for emerging economies to kind of help its greater potential in diplomatic and military affairs. But it also means bringing soldiers from both sides and working together, and this helps with overall systems and organisations. And this feeds back into doctrine and better understanding of procedures and building a common set of codes. But it also breaks down perceived barriers and fosters trust and goodwill. But crucially, the cost is low for this recommendation because each side exchanges an exact or similar officer, while the shared language of English assists with communications at importantly an operational level. However, the major concern always relates to the officers exchange and the quality of that. So therefore, any numerical upscaling must keep reciprocal quality at the forefront of any decisions made. To conclude, I wanted to convey through an extensive report the overarching possibilities of doing more with the Commonwealth's latent strategic abilities, and crucial to understanding Commonwealth security concerns is that we're looking ahead and not to the past. History, as I've shown, provides the backdrop, but ultimately solutions to Commonwealth's defensive problems need progressive and modern architecture. Put simply, the Commonwealth must be better prepared. And we want the Commonwealth to have a bright and prosperous future, but we think this will be difficult to attain without security understanding. But we acknowledge that, as I've said before, that closer Commonwealth defence ties does start from a low base. However, as a collection of developing and emerging economies, the Commonwealth can utilise this very special and unique club in the strategic realm for mutual aid, protection and security. And we see no better way than to commence discussions at this lunchtime on a forum of Commonwealth partners. And that's why I urge everyone in this room to help us bring our policy proposals into reality. These weren't just thought exercises that we dreamed up. This is about getting governments and armed forces to support a Commonwealth Security Forum. And with your help, hopefully we can build a lasting achievement. And many lives would indeed benefit and certainly prosper. But the last word should go to Dr. Lynn Fox, the former UK Defence Secretary, from the forward that he wrote in our report. We can't have too much dialogue or an excess of information in the era of globalisation. It may be that the Commonwealth is coming of age in the right way at the right time. It is time to be bold. So thank you for listening, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy the lunch later on.
Thank you very much. Rather than have independent questions after each speaker, we're going to hold a single question period at the end of the speakers. Thank you very much. And thank you, Tim.
And now we're going to commence with lunch, and right after lunch, we'll have the Honorable Hugh Segal and the Minister. Bon appetit.
You'd be great too.
Someone will say that.
Well, that's where they train. Well, I saw Nigel Farage last. I know. Now, one of our great problems is we have no idea who's in the country. And then they get chilled. And then they get delayed. And then we try to do See, that was but you're allowed to do that.
Generally, right now, live stream is empty, but it's still recording. Yeah. Yeah. There is no way to basically the live stream press conference, they'll upload it directly. So the live stream goes regardless. That one I'm recording. Just the moment I close it, it's online. Yeah. I'm not sure about that, but what we could do actually, I don't know if you figure YouTube, is we could download the video from YouTube, edit it, and then re-upload it. Yeah, or we could just put like video text, like, oh, you might want to skip it out for the next one. But this one is completely recording, and yeah, I even know this one. No, this one's not recording yet. Okay. If you want to get in the
No precise prominence. So that's the process. How's your lunch, everyone?
Thank you very much. I'd like to take this opportunity to mention to you that it was our president, Julie Lintout, was looking forward to the opportunity of introducing our speakers today, but she was called away on an emergency this morning, and so I have the very great pleasure of introducing our speakers. Before I do that, I'd like to point out the chairman of the Royal Commonwealth Society is here with us today. Andrew, would you mind standing, please? Thank you. Mr. Andrew McMurphy. Thank you very much. Thank you. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our next speaker, the Honorable Hugh Segal. Hugh is the chair of the NATO Association of Canada. He is the 5th Master of Massey College, and he recently finished a 9-year term as the Senator for Kingston, Frontenac, Leeds, and Ontario. He was the 4th Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, and prior to that, he was the Chief of Staff to Ontario Premier Bill Davis. He has served as the Chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. He has served as the Chair of the Special Senate Committee on Anti-Terrorism, and he is also a Senior Fellow of the Monk School of Global Affairs. Hugh Segal is a Canadian political strategist, author, and commentator. Regarding our subject matter here today, in July 2010, he was appointed to the Commonwealth Eminent Persons Group by the Secretary General at the time, Kamlesh Sharma. The group's mandate was to set out decisive recommendations on how to strengthen the Commonwealth and fill its potential in the 21st century. In 2011, the federal government appointed Hugh Special Envoy to the Commonwealth with the task of convincing individual countries to sign on to the Eminent Persons Group 106 recommendations. It is my very great pleasure here today to welcome our next speaker, the Honorable Hugh Segal.
Colleagues, I will be very brief. We are here today to hear from Tim Hewish, which we did before lunch, and of course to hear from the Minister. And I've known for many, many years that rule number 614 of the political lexicon is, don't trample on a minister's speaking time. And I will not do that. I want to say two things, if I may, about the Minister. His engagement on our defense commitments worldwide, his direct involvement in difficult areas of procurement, his firm response on issues of inappropriate conduct in some Canadian force areas, all reflect a sense of diligence and determination to serve that have typified this minister's service in other departments. Canada's defense forces in recalibration after the intense operational tempo of the Afghan campaign need someone with the leadership skills, intense commitment, and broad political savvy of this minister now more than ever. I've suggested that he add the initials ATD after his name for Action This Day. Churchillians in the room will recognize that, but it would be a very accurate reflection of his approach on difficult and compelling issues. I will only offer a few thoughts for consideration with respect to Tim's very thoughtful and constructive report. When I served as a special envoy to the Commonwealth, I did have the opportunity to interact with Commonwealth military leadership in Asia and Africa and the Caribbean. And the hard truth is that beyond Canada, the UK, India, and Australia, few, if any, of our sister forces are structured for out-of-area expeditionary capacity. Most of the forces in other Commonwealth countries are focused on internal command and control, some border protection work, and aid to the civil power. This is not a criticism on my part, it's simply a statement of facts on the ground. Secondly, we therefore have to take a good look at what the new definition of defense has become after the tragic events of 9/11. Defense now encompasses integrated intelligence operations between police, security services, armed forces, and armed forces intelligence in a way that provides strong, apprehensive, and preventive engagement in the interest of the security and freedom of all Commonwealth countries. Here we must be frank and open about the challenges faced by Pakistan. Frontline position against some of the worst terrorist threats in the world, both within and without its borders. The ongoing dynamic between Pakistan and India, two Commonwealth partners with competent and well-trained armed forces, is have to take into consideration when we think about joint security efforts that are Commonwealth-wide. My third thought is to embrace the recommendation about military scholarships, joint military training offered in the Hewish report with some considerable enthusiasm. I think, however, that we need to be very thoughtful about the kind of training and education that might be constructively offered in a way that is supportive of the logical conclusions that emerge from my first two observations. Training around doctrine and technical command and control skills, military doctrine around disaster relief, hopefully the standing up of joint Commonwealth units, companies, and brigades focused on specific mission training and preparation should be a strong, voluntary, and multi-year goal. Joint operations in Asia embraces challenging like the South China Sea, which affects our Malaysian brothers and sisters. Disaster relief, for example, the encompass naval, air, amphibious disaster relief, and other logistical capacities that are necessary would be a good thing for us to be practicing together on with our Commonwealth brothers and sisters. They can also start as joint training and education enterprises over a short time and then acquire some operational status. Here we should be cognizant of the excellent work done by the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence via RMCS Shrivenham and Cranfield University in graduate courses throughout Commonwealth and non-Commonwealth countries, into which masters in war studies and strategic studies graduate programs are offered to leading civilian and uniformed officials around the world. Adding to this makes more sense than recreating the wheel. We do have the Commonwealth of Learning, a Commonwealth institution that's based in Vancouver. It does distance education, and there'd be no reason that we couldn't work with them to develop some programs for our Commonwealth brothers and sisters in the military in a fashion that was constructive and reflect some of the distance learning activity that our own Royal Military College now does so effectively for members of our forces who are into increasing their own educational capacity. My fourth point is on instrumentality. I respectfully disagree with Tim about the idea of piggybacking onto the heads of government meetings, a gathering around defense and security issues. For many participants, sadly, under the present Commonwealth leadership, which is a bit limp-wristed, chosen meetings have become social and non-substantive. And Commonwealth leadership is truly weak-willed when meetings like Colombo transpire, when the fewest heads of government were in attendance in Sri Lanka for good and substantial reason because of the human rights record in that country at that time. India and Canada and Mauritius did not send first ministers on principle, and Her Majesty, for whatever reason, chose to her benefit not to attend. With a new Secretary General to be chosen in Malta, this might and should improve. My counter recommendation for your consideration would be the use of the annual Commonwealth Foreign Ministers meetings that accompany the UN General Assembly every fall in New York for a security and defense forum open to all Commonwealth countries at the ministerial level. Delegations could include defense and security ministers from the Commonwealth. In a perfect world, the Secretariat would designate an Assistant Secretary General whose office would establish a meaningful agenda and work up for these meetings so that they would actually make the attendees who showed up believe that the time spent was worthwhile. A final caveat. When some joint defense capacity planning was suggested by Canada at the EPG deliberations and ran from 2010 to 2011, all that could be agreed to unanimously was joint planning and expertise around an emergency and disaster capacity, as well as more rapid visa arrangements so that experts and practitioners could move quickly to disaster-hit countries when their help was needed. But since then, the world has changed, and security threats have expanded. The time to move forward across the multi-faith, multicultural, geographically expansive organization known as the Commonwealth of Nations is very much before us, and in this respect, I'm very grateful for the tremendous work done by Tim Hewish and the report that's in front of you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Our next guest needs no introduction, but I will try at any rate. He has held positions as the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. He has held the position of Minister of Employment and Social Development. He was the longest serving Minister of Citizenship and Immigration in Canada. He is currently the Minister of National Defence, and he is also the Minister for Multiculturalism. Monikers in the media and citations include comments such as, Calgary's Jason Kenney named Canada's best overall MP in Ottawa. Parliamentarians of the Year Awards, hardest working MP and Minister Jason Kenney. Kenney has been named one of Canada's 100 leaders of the future. Another citation, one of Canada's leading conservative activists. The Canadian Chinese community nicknamed Jason Kenney the Smiling Buddha. He holds a unique position, not just in the Conservative Party, but in the eyes of Canadians. A very dear friend of mine, the late Honorable Senator James Kelleher, spoke very highly of the minister when referring to him, and I paraphrase his comments. Jason is a conservative's conservative, hardworking and dedicated, and much more than just an asset for the party. He is a true asset for making a better Canada, a more prosperous Canada. Thank you, Minister Kenney, for being here with us today. Our Minister of Defence and Minister of Multiculturalism, the Honorable Jason Kenney.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and it's always a bit unnerving, I must say, to follow the eminent Hugh Segal. You know, he's so eminent that he was named a member of the Commonwealth Eminent Persons Group. He said to me just now he felt like a bit of an imposter. But I said, Hugh, in the Oxford Illustrated Dictionary, next to the word eminent is your picture. It is a great honor to be here with one of Canada's great public-minded citizens, a loyal promoter of the Commonwealth and her highest ideals, and a strong voice for our national security and defense, which became particularly robust during this tenure in the Senate. So thank you, Hugh, and also welcome to Canada, Tim. Thank you very much for your contribution to the important issues that we are discussing. This is my second time speaking from a podium here at this esteemed and yet renewed club. And I also find it a bit intimidating to speak under the shadow of the ghost of General Sir Arthur Currie, in this magnificent portrait, which looks like it was painted by El Greco to me all the time. But Currie was long after El Greco. But he reminds us of the very best of the martial virtues of the Canadian military and its unique approach. Sir Arthur Currie, of course, was an ordinary civilian who didn't have, he had served in militias, but had not been a general officer in the regular army. And yet, through his characteristically Canadian humility, bothered to do what perhaps some English, British generals did not do, which was to studiously learn from the mistakes of the first 2 years of the Great War. And in so doing, to develop with his team of Canadian senior officers a different approach, which involved full involvement of junior officers and senior NCOs, and tactical innovation, which of course led to the great Canadian victory at Vimy Ridge, and in the last 100 days, when our army became known as the shock troops on the Western Front. And so I'm reminded about that great legacy that our men and women in uniform continue to this very day. I'm also reminded in that we are discussing the role for defense cooperation in the Commonwealth, that Canada's historical participation in British Imperial and Commonwealth missions was not limited to cooperation with Britain, New Zealand, and Australia in the Great War. One brilliant example of broader cooperation was at the Second Battle of Ypres in April of 1915, just over a century ago, when young Canadian farmers and lumbermen, fishers and factory workers suddenly found themselves thrust into the front lines of the charnel house of the Great War at the Second Battle of Ypres, and were sent out over the top on the first day of that disastrous battle, only to face the first ever mass use of gas as a weapon of war. And of course, thousands of Canadians died in the first 36 hours at the Battle of Ypres, but they were relieved on the third day of the battle by the Indian Army, by the Punjabi regiments, by the Sikhs with their proud turbans who helped to hold the line. And I cannot think of a better example of the solidarity of the Commonwealth that is deeply rooted in our history than the Canadians being relieved by the Sikhs, many of whose grandchildren are now proud Canadians, some of whom were the Canadian military. In fact, I must point out there's a beautiful exhibit done by a proud Canadian Sikh military historian called Duty, Honor, and Issat about the interplay between the Canadian and Indian regiments in the Great War and beyond. Friends, this is a wonderful initiative on the part of the NATO Association of Canada, and I want to commend you for collaborating with the Commonwealth, the Royal Commonwealth Society, in giving a podium to Tim Hewish for his ideas about greater Commonwealth cooperation. And I want to thank, again, Hugh Segal for bringing his uniquely informed voice to this discussion. I think it's important to begin with first principles and remind ourselves what the Commonwealth is all about. You know, Her Majesty the Queen said in 2009 that the Commonwealth is not an organization with a mission, but rather it is an opportunity for its people to work together to achieve practical solutions to problems. One of these, which the organizers wish to draw to our attention today, is how to increase through the Commonwealth, the exchange of knowledge and experience in areas of defense and security. But of course, what is it that unites the Commonwealth? This incredibly diverse collection of countries with different socioeconomic statuses, different histories, apart from the English language. What unites us is a shared patrimony of values, the rule of law, parliamentary governance, the protection of human dignity and human rights, representative government, and of course, institutions that incarnate all of those values. I'm reminded of how, sometimes we Canadians, I think, take for granted these values. We don't realize what a precious gift they are in various parts of the world. And I'd like to share with you, Canada has been, of course, our institutions were founded largely by our British forebears in this country, our brilliant institutions of parliamentary government. But through maintaining the remarkable experiment of sustained high levels of immigration, we have also received wave after wave of new Canadians from all corners of the world, including and perhaps especially the Commonwealth. Two of the largest waves of modern Canadian post-war immigration have been from Hong Kong and from India. More broadly from former Commonwealth countries, members of the former British Empire in South Asia. And each of them have brought their own Commonwealth experience and reinforced the sense of Commonwealth solidarity in Canada. One particularly interesting example I want to share with you. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was the founder of the Chinese Revolution of 1911. He actually visited Canada. Here's what Dr. Sun said at the University of Hong Kong in 1923. Quotes, "Where and how did I get my revolutionary and modern ideas? The answer is, I got my idea in this very place, in the colony of Hong Kong. I'm going to tell you how I got these ideas. More than 30 years ago, I was studying in Hong Kong and spent a great deal of spare time walking the streets of the colony. Hong Kong impressed me a great deal because there was orderly calm, because there was artistic work being done without interruption. But I went to my home in Huangshan twice a year and immediately noticed the great difference. There, I found disorder instead of order, insecurity instead of security. I compared Huangshan with Hong Kong, and although they are only 50 miles apart, the difference of the governments impressed me very much. Afterwards, I saw the outside world, and I began to wonder how it was that foreigners, that Englishmen, could do such things as they had done, for example, with the barren rock of Hong Kong within 70 or 80 years, while China, in 4,000 years, had no places like Hong Kong. It was the father of modern China. Sun Yat-sen's comments bring to mind Hong Kong's brave young pro-democracy protesters last year, many of whom embraced colonial Hong Kong's blue ensign with the Union Jack in the corner as the symbol of their democracy movement. And symbols matter. One protester, who gave her name as Wei, told a reporter that she was carrying the blue ensign because, quotes, "We want the freedoms we had under the British." So Sun Yat-sen's question is worth asking today in all corners of the Commonwealth. What are the real ingredients of peace and security, prosperity? Which development policies really work and which do not? Today, Canada stands out as one of the best countries in the world with the highest sustained levels of immigration in our post-war history because of our tradition of unity and diversity, because we share those same values that young protesters, democracy protesters in Hong Kong crave to be reflected in their public institutions. So I offer these comments to remind us of the great value of this patrimony that we share, some rather latently in parts of the Commonwealth. And on that point, let me strongly, on behalf of the Government of Canada, applaud Hugh Segal and his brilliant work, not just on the Eminent Persons Group, but through public diplomacy and scholarly work, and his work in the Senate to advance the agenda of Commonwealth reform. Because quite frankly, I think that an unreformed Commonwealth will be a less hospitable place for concrete defense cooperation than a Commonwealth whose institutions reflect the best of the Commonwealth's values. This is a challenge, as I know Tim is aware, in very many practical ways. Should we begin, for example, a Commonwealth Military Scholarship, how do we ensure that individuals who participate in that belong to militaries who are not engaged in human rights violations, or not engaged in espionage against fellow Commonwealth countries? So these are difficult questions, but I believe they can be resolved, and I believe that Tim has given us a fantastic roadmap for potential reform. I join Hugh in expressing great interest in the idea of a Commonwealth Security Forum. I think there is value for a more organized platform for the sharing of best practices amongst Commonwealth countries on security and military issues. I mean, after all, it's no coincidence that if you look at the uniforms of Commonwealth military personnel, they're almost all identical. And that wasn't true of the Canadian uniform after unification, but that's another matter that we're seeking to correct. You may not be aware, but there was a disastrous experiment where all three services were folded into one, where we had people with Army ranks on naval vessels, and they were all wearing the same green uniforms. But we've restored the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and many of the traditions of the militia regiments of our Army, and we have reestablished many of the unique, distinctive Commonwealth symbols in our militaries that whether you see an Indian officer or an officer from Trinidad and Tobago, a British officer or an Australian officer, you'll be able to detect from which service they come, what rank they're at, because they share that, because there is that shared heritage. So that is an obvious starting point, foundation upon which we can build. I would suggest there are several, of course, international security fora. There's the Shangri-La Forum in East Asia. There, of course, is the Munich Security Summit, but there's also the Halifax Security Forum, a notable achievement of my predecessor, the Honorable Peter MacKay, who established this as a meeting point that could easily attract senior American decision makers, being just an hour away from Washington, that is off the normal international conference circuit, and which is a security forum that actually has certain parameters. It does not invite guests, speakers, or attendees from countries that are gross human rights violators or who do not share our basic democratic values. So it is a place where security issues can be discussed in a context of shared democratic values. And I would be, Tim, eager to see if we could see how the Halifax Security Forum could be used perhaps as a nascent platform for a Commonwealth Security Forum for precisely that idea that might solve the problem that we face of not wanting generals strutting around a security forum who represent dictatorships who happen to be Commonwealth members, to be blunt. And I think because it's hosted by a Commonwealth country, and because it also happens to attract senior American leadership, I think it might be a useful, at least genesis for a more formalized Commonwealth Security Forum. I think we should always try to start with platforms that exist rather than going to great expense at creating new ones. Secondly, let me say I'm keenly interested in your notion of Commonwealth Military Scholarships. As has been noted by you, both Tim and Hugh, there are Commonwealth junior officers and in some cases senior officers who attend the Canadian Defence College here in Toronto, and we also are happy to welcome officer cadets from Commonwealth countries at the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston et Collège Militaire Royal à Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, que le gouvernement a effectivement réouvert 6 ans après une fermeture pendant une décennie. In fact, I was at the matriculation ceremony for our officer cadets at Collège Militaire Royal just a couple of months ago, and I was pleased to see several young officer cadets from the Jamaican Army graduating alongside their Canadian comrades and having learned a little bit of French as well. I don't know how useful that will be in Jamaica, but if they ever get to go to Haiti, it could be very useful indeed. And I asked them about their experience. They said, apart from the winter, it was a fantastic experience. But they were glad that they would not have to be suffering through another Canadian winter in Saint-Jean. But I was proud to see those young Jamaican officer cadets having benefited from the best that Canadian military education has to offer. And of course, here at the Defence College, we do have a number of both junior and senior officers learning from the very best in the Canadian military, well, including, I think, Hugh is a lecturer at the Defence College. And I'm keen on exploring ways that we can expand opportunities. Tim, you've emphasized the point about scholarships. It's one thing to give people an opportunity. It's another for if they're coming from a developed country, a developing country with a modest budget, how do we ensure their participation? Of course, we do have the military training assistance program, the MTAP, that does provide 4 scholarships for language training for officers from friendly developing countries, which they typically do at Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, but in some cases also offers, I believe, bursaries for students attending the Defence College. And we can certainly look at expanding that on a focused Commonwealth basis. Again, we have to work through the challenge of how do you ensure that perhaps a officer from the Indian Army is comfortable sitting in the classroom next to an officer from the Pakistani Army. But perhaps through intelligent scheduling, there are ways that one can work around points of tension like that. And finally, with respect to upscaling Commonwealth Officer Exchange Programs, again, I think this is an idea with great merit. Canada has a pretty robust officer exchange program with allied countries. Some of them are quite expensive. For example, for us to locate an officer in the United Kingdom and then pay them and their expenses in British pounds is not without significant cost. But Tim, you pointed to some of the technical challenges about this. Not all of the Commonwealth countries have complementary levels of preparedness, of equipment, of systems. So how does an exchange program actually present a complementarity? And if we could work through some of those issues, I think this is something that we could definitely enhance. Let me tell you that we recently received a visit from the leader of the world's largest democracy, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who just last year won the largest democratic mandate in human history. Not to put too fine a point on it, and who spent 3 days with us in Canada. And I was very pleased to see that during the extended bilateral discussion between members of our cabinet and Prime Minister Modi and his delegation, that one of the issues on which he placed the greatest emphasis was Canada-India defense cooperation. In particular, he wanted to learn from the Canadian military on cold weather military practices, in which we have a great deal of experience, in which the Indian Army copes with the Himalayas all the time. So not only do they want to share technology, but also training. They asked for opportunities to send their officer cadets to our officer cadet colleges, such as RMC, and some more sensitive areas of cooperation. So there is definitely an appetite from one of our largest Commonwealth partners. And I was just meeting last week with Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, who underscored Australia's shared view of the need for Commonwealth reform, but also growing defense cooperation between the two jurisdictions. Let me close by giving you one very, I think, brilliant example of at least bilateral Commonwealth defense cooperation. As you will recall, last year and much into the first months of this year, we were facing a terrible human tragedy in West Africa with the Ebola crisis, in which some 10,000 infections proved to be fatal. 12 of the 13 districts in Sierra Leone, a Commonwealth member state since 1961, were amongst the areas most severely affected. As the Commonwealth Secretary General Kamala Sharma told assembled High Commissioners in London last October, the Ebola virus is an unparalleled challenge to the social fabric and well-being of affected countries. It is a medical calamity which is taking an enormous toll at the personal and national level. I'm pleased to report that Canada committed, I am pleased to report that Canada committed $65 million to the anti-Ebola effort in West Africa, making Canada one of the top 5 donors. Now, that applause was led by Dr. Colin Soldan, who's done a lot of medical humanitarian work abroad, and who is himself a native of a Commonwealth country, Pakistan. In Sierra Leone, Canada's Operation Sirona was the military component of our contribution. Thanks to Major General Jean-Robert Bernier, the former Surgeon General of Canada, the Royal Canadian Medical Service collaborated with our British counterparts in classic Commonwealth fashion About 40 Canadian Forces healthcare and support staff were deployed to Britain's elite Kerrytown Treatment Unit, south of the capital of Freetown. They were doing amazing work alongside their British counterparts in a top-notch facility and acquiring world-class experience in epidemic containment. General Bernier told me that the British and Canadians worked and integrated seamlessly. I was recently meeting with Secretary of Defense Michael Fallon. I had a great pleasure meeting him at Royal Horse Guards following the Trooping the Colour, which was a great privilege. And he raved about the seamless cooperation between Canadian and British doctors and nurses in saving lives. And apparently the level of interoperability and cooperation was so much that we actually had some romances come out of the joint placement, the joint deployment. The point is that the point there is that you could have British and Canadian officers arrive in a remote location with a very significant and dangerous challenge, and within 24 hours, we're working together in integrated medical teams. That's the kind, at the highest level, that's the kind of cooperation that is possible cooperation that can save lives. Members of the NATO Association here will likely be interested to know that General Bernier, who oversaw that deployment, has now become the first ever non-European chair of the Committee of Chiefs of Military Medical Services in NATO, which is the panel of Surgeon Generals for NATO nations. It's a great achievement for a highly professional French-Canadian who I happen to know is deeply attached to the Commonwealth and to have an opportunity to lead Canada at Brussels in this respect. So, in closing, let me say that we do see many fruitful forms of Commonwealth security cooperation. More can be done. You've identified some of the ways in which that can happen, Tim. Please count Canada as an ally in pursuing that. As we pursue with vigor the agenda of Commonwealth reform, and as we continue to be motivated by the highest values of the Commonwealth, the values that former Prime Minister Diefenbaker gave great expression to in insisting on the suspension of South Africa's membership during the apartheid era in the 1960s, and the values that Dr. Sun Yat-sen spoke to, which continue to be a dream for people in many parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Minister Kenney. I would like to ask you to come forward while we present you. I know you've been waiting for this statement.
Cheers. Thank you.
Now, I know that some people do have to get going shortly, but we would like to open it up to 2 or 3 questions for the Minister, and then also for Tim Hewish and the Honorable Hugh Segal. So we do have a roving mic. If you do have a question, sir, just wait for the mic. And Dr. Boyd.
So we have a minister for the Francophonie. Why do we not have a minister for the Commonwealth?
Well, you do. He's more senior minister. He's the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Well, let me say that I asked that question of the Honorable John Baird when he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and his response was, "You have a minister of the Commonwealth, Segal, and you're looking at him." Exactly.
Question about Ukraine?
Okay, sure. It's not in the Commonwealth, but I'm happy to take the question. Not yet, it's not.
Just interested to know what you'd be prepared to do to further help Ukraine and what that may look like.
First of all, Canada is looking forward to receive a visit from Prime Minister Yatsenyuk later this week. I was in Kiev and Lviv in Ukraine just 10 days ago, where I welcomed the first installment of the some 200 Canadian Army troops that we are deploying to Ukraine on a joint training exercise. They will be helping to modernize the Ukrainian military, operating largely out of a training base in far western Ukraine near the Polish border. We'll also be providing training for military police, for flight safety training, improvised explosive device detection and detonation, and emergency medical training. This is a clear indication of Canada's solidarity. I think it's symbolically important that while they will be remote from the conflict, Canadian troops will be on the ground helping to modernize Ukraine, which is committed to a program of military reform in the context of NATO. Not NATO membership, but NATO ministers and member states are providing practical support, funding, and training to help modernize the Ukrainian military. In addition to that, of course, Canada has been one of the largest providers of non-lethal, non-kinetic military equipment to Ukraine, providing tons of equipment that was enormously helpful for them to get through the winter, winter gear, night vision goggles, and other equipment that was enormously helpful. And we are also providing Ukraine with regular satellite images taken by Canadian procured radar sat images over the territory of eastern Ukraine to help them track foreign troop movements on their own soil. President Poroshenko told me 2 weeks ago in Ukraine that these images have proved to be of huge effect to Ukrainian military efforts. So these are the initiatives that we've taken to date. In addition to Canada's strong participation in NATO assurance measures through what we call Operation Reassurance, the deployment of a modernized Canadian frigate in the Baltic and Black Seas, Royal Canadian Air Force participation in Baltic air policing patrols, and the deployment of a company-sized infantry formation based in Poland that's been on joint training exercises there, Romania, Lithuania, and elsewhere. We're also deploying staff officers to NATO command centers in the Baltic states, as was recently announced by the Prime Minister. And we continue to explore other possibilities. As the Prime Minister has said, the possibility of providing kinetic equipment is one that is on the table. There's not a consensus to do so amongst our allied countries. But I think it's important that President Putin, what we understand, and I think what all NATO members understand, is that President Putin only understands deterrence and strength and resolve. He regards weakness as an invitation for aggression. And that is why it's important for us to continue to demonstrate a posture of deterrence.
Michael Bonner over here.
I have a more general question on the Commonwealth for Tim. As you recall that Goldman Sachs did a study of potential currency union, and that one of the worst was a random sample of all countries in the world whose names begin with the letter M. And the European Union was dead last. The Commonwealth, however, was second, if I recall correctly, second to Latin American countries. Now, with this in mind, this sort of statistic or the study that may have sort of disappeared from public consciousness, we may be recalled to this idea by the Greek crisis. Now, where do things stand now? Is the case for a Commonwealth trading bloc stronger now? Does it seem stronger, or does it seem just as enticing as it was before?
No, I think you make an interesting point. First and foremost, it's good not we didn't see the Commonwealth as a bloc. It is all over the world. It's more a network. First and foremost, that sort of bloc mentality is very kind of Cold War, 20th century. It's very much outdated. So if we keep that kind of network mentality far more embedded in our consciousness, I think we'll do a lot better. In terms of currency alliances, as you see with Greece, there are certain issues. Commonwealth countries, it's very much about sovereignty, keeping what you have. But again, there are lots of opportunities for bilateral trade between Commonwealth countries, and we want it to continue. But the only way we can see the Commonwealth advance, I think, realistically, is through opening markets and through free trade. So, yes.
Question for the Honorable Minister. The Indian think tanks have been thinking of having a strategic dialogue with Canada, especially in the area of hybrid warfare, modern warfare. And I've been trying to start that for the last 6 years, but there's been absolutely no response from the Canadian side. The Honorable Minister look into this. Think tanks like the IDSA, the US side, especially in hybrid warfare, winter warfare, mountain warfare.
Between Canada
And the Indian Army.
in India. Well, I alluded to a request from Prime Minister Modi for cooperation on a number of levels that I can't talk about in the public domain. But rest assured that we are developing tremendous enhancements in Canada-Indian military cooperation as a priority. And we understand, of course, India has a great deal of experience in not just in the military, but also in its security and intelligence apparatus in dealing with terrorism, both domestic and foreign terrorism that emanates from foreign countries. And so, quite frankly, we have a lot to learn, and there's great value, I think, in sharing information. You know, they're probably the single most effective platform for intelligence cooperation in the world is called the Five Eyes, which includes, of course, Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. For various reasons, there would not be an interest amongst those member states to enlarge that platform, but there are other more intense ways in which we can share intelligence with like-minded countries that are dealing with the threat of terrorism. Similarly, when you talk about hybrid warfare or counterterrorism operations, Canada learned through great pain and sacrifice many extremely relevant tactical lessons from our operation in Afghanistan and Kandahar, which perhaps could be useful to the Indian military as well. So I think there is the basis for a greater cooperation in those areas, and rest assured every opportunity is being pursued.
I'm afraid this will have to be our last question.
My question is regarding the Commonwealth, but may I just say in 2 words that I'm originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina. July 11, 1995, the worst genocide happened in Bosnia and Srebrenica, recognized by the United Nations as the worst genocide after the Second World War Holocaust. And the Canadian government marked that 3 days ago. So thank you. My question is regarding the Commonwealth. As a member of the Commonwealth Society of Canada, I attended some conferences, around Commonwealth Society of Canada conferences. And just a few weeks ago in Winnipeg, I learned that Mr. Jason Kenney, a long time ago, was the winner of the Queen's Essay competition. So that was very interesting. I would like to ask all of 3 guests, and especially our minister, is there any publication in plans, something like a written publication, like a book on the Commonwealth? Thank you.
Well, I'll defer that to Hugh Segal. I was afraid you were going to ask if there was plans to publish my essay when I was 14 years of age. You wouldn't want to read that. But I do recall having won a very handsome check for $250. And when I was 14, that was a fortune. So I've forever been indebted to the Commonwealth Society.
Well, Minister, let me answer the question in 2 ways. I remember when I was visiting with Canadian forces in Bosnia on the 3rd rotation, and a diplomat for the French took me aside and said, you North Americans really shouldn't get yourselves involved in these European affairs. It's for European diplomacy to handle. And I looked at him and I said, so which cycle of European diplomacy do you think we should use as our constructive reference point? Sarajevo 1 to Sarajevo 2, that's one option. And the other would be Srebrenica back to Auschwitz. Which one of those 2 cycles is the most encouraging with respect to European diplomacy? And I think it said something that on the ground, British, Canadian, and other forces, part of the S4 operation to stabilize and let people in Bosnia get back to some kind of normal life. And I think that reflects what we all share as Canadians. The good news is that the Commonwealth Secretariat produces an annual piece of work on the work of the Commonwealth. And I think that there's going to be very serious reference to Tim Hewish's recommendations. And my belief is that as Canada and other Commonwealth countries gather at Malta for the purpose of choosing a new Secretary General, the notion of a reformed and engaged Commonwealth that can deal with the sorts of ideas you've heard talked about today may be very much on the agenda, and based on who is chosen to lead the Commonwealth, we can see real progress down the road. I don't think under the present leadership there's much of a chance, but there is new leadership coming in, so I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Just very briefly, just to answer your direct point, we're actually going to do a paper on Commonwealth education and the understanding of the Commonwealth with young people, because 60% of the Commonwealth are actually under 30, and I include myself in that bracket, but only just. And this is the main point, that people don't seem to understand the Commonwealth or the connections they have with other countries, especially if you look at the United Kingdom. We very much got a very European lens at the moment about how we see the world. The world isn't just Europe. There are so many other countries, and the Commonwealth doesn't make the last section of that. So our report is going to look at young Britain's understanding of the Commonwealth, and we're going to advocate for more materials to be given to schools so they learn about the Commonwealth and the diversity that they have, and build those relationships, whether it's bilateral, multilateral, and then hopefully with our Canadian friends as well. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to ask for a round of applause for our
If I could just recommend the full report. You all received the two-pager summary. The full report is at the registration table, as is an advertisement for another event that Tim is going to be at tomorrow night with the Royal Commonwealth Society, so I suggest you pick that up. Tim's going to be talking a little bit more about the economic side of the Commonwealth. But really, thank you all so much for staying here. I believe Minister Kenney will be able to stay for a few minutes, but I invite the other members of the head table, the vice presidents of the the NATO Association of Canada, and the directors of the NATO Association of Canada to make their way up to the library where we will have a bit of an event.
On behalf of the NATO Association of Canada, I thank you for coming today. Thank you very much.